Imagine putting money in an envelope and throwing it in the trash every single month for 7 years. Not spending it, not losing it, literally throwing it away, consciously, methodically, on schedule. Sounds absurd, but that's exactly what Mike was doing. And it's probably exactly what you're doing too. He stood at his workbench under a metal swing arm lamp at 7 p.m. after the last customer had left, and the shop smelled of motor oil and cooling metal. In his left hand, a shop rag. In his right, an envelope from his insurance company. He tore it open mechanically, the way you open the 100th envelope of its kind. Inside was his auto insurance renewal. $2,400 for the year. Mike put the paper on the workbench, pulled out his phone, opened the calculator. It was a habit of his, never trust feelings, only trust numbers. He punched in this year's premium, then added last year's, then the year before that. He roughly remembered what he paid each time. Premiums went up, the car got older, but the logic stayed the same. 2 minutes later, a number sat on his screen. $15,400. For 7 years. For one car. For a 2019 Toyota Camry he'd bought for $25,000, which was now worth maybe $18,000 on the used market. He looked at the screen again. Then at the car. It sat in the corner of the bay, fully repaired, belonging to a stranger, waiting for its owner. Then back to the screen. $15,400. That wasn't counting basic liability. That wasn't counting the maintenance he did himself, but still bought parts for out of pocket. That was just his comprehensive and collision coverage. A policy he had used exactly twice in 7 years. Once for a parking lot fender bender, and once when someone swiped his mirror in the night and drove off. His total payouts for those two claims? $2,500. He had paid $15,400. Got back $2,500. The difference, $12,900. Just gone. Vaporized. Mike turned off his phone and shoved it into his pocket. He grabbed the rag and started wiping his hands, slowly, finger by finger, exactly as he did whenever he was trying to process something that didn't add up. He knew how to take things apart. That was his superpower. Taking what was broken or mysterious and stripping it down to the root cause. Engine knocking? He hears exactly which cylinder it is. Transmission slipping? He feels exactly which gear. People brought him cars that other mechanics had given up on, and he always found the problem. It wasn't arrogance, it was just experience and method. But with his own money, there was no method, only habit. Bill comes in, pay it. Notice arrives, clear it. That's how it was wired, and he had never sat down to inspect this system as meticulously as he'd inspect a suspension or fuel line. Why? He couldn't really explain it, probably because with cars, he knew exactly what he was looking for. With money, it felt like the rules were already set. Pay and you're protected. Don't pay and you're at risk. Simple, almost mechanical logic. The blind spot. Mike lived in Marietta, a suburb of Atlanta. He rented a house for $2,000 a month. He worked at an auto repair shop he co-owned with his buddy Steve. He wasn't an employee. He owned half the business. They opened 6 years ago, started in a 2-car garage, and now had a proper 3-bay shop, loyal customers, and a solid reputation in the county. Mike made decent money. A good month brought in $10,000. A slow month was closer to $6,000. By local standards, he was doing fine. By his own standards, too. He wasn't complaining. But $15,400 for one car's insurance, that was over 2 months of solid hard work. That was a brand new 2-post lift for the shop. That was the emergency fund he'd been meaning to build for 3 years. He kept telling himself he'd start putting $500 a month into a high-yield savings account. But something always came up. Taxes, parts, rent hikes. And now, another envelope from the insurance company. Mike folded the bill in half and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He turned off the lamp over the workbench, stood in the dark for a moment. Yellow, autumn streetlight spilled through the high window near the ceiling. He looked at the stranger's Camry in the corner, then at his own, parked outside the bay doors. He thought about a customer he'd checked in that morning, a guy in his mid-30s with a BMW X5, in for a routine oil change. While Mike inspected the vehicle, the guy sat in the waiting corner, talking on his phone. Not loudly, but Mike caught fragments, something about a contract, an attorney, and needing to transfer the auto insurance to the company before the end of the quarter. The guy spoke calmly and efficiently, the way people talk about things they thoroughly understand. Mike hadn't paid much attention to it then, but now he remembered. Transfer the insurance to the company. He didn't actually know what that meant. The words made sense individually, but strung together, they formed a mechanism he didn't understand. Like hearing an engine you've never worked on. You hear the noise, but you don't know where it's coming from. He locked up the shop, got in his car, fired it up. He let it idle, warming up. Not because the manual said to, but because experience told him it was right. While the engine came up to operating temp, he pulled the bill out again and looked at it in the glow of the dashboard. $2,400. Due by the end of the month. He put the paper away and put the car in drive. It was cold out. October had hit hard this year, bringing frost right out of the gate. As Mike drove the familiar route home, he wasn't thinking about insurance. He was thinking about how many things he could calculate with absolute precision. Plan a steering rack down to the millimeter, brake pad life down to the exact mileage, oil consumption based on driving habits. He knew how to calculate everything that had to do with cars, and he had absolutely no idea how to calculate the money those cars were draining from him. The second level. Their corporate party wasn't exactly corporate. Steve called it a customer appreciation night. Mike called it the shop's birthday. 6 years in business. They kept it simple, invited about 15 regulars, pushed the cars out, set up folding tables right in the bay, and bought BBQ and beer. It turned out great. People showed up, chatted, some brought their wives, some came straight from the office in suits. It was loud and warm, and for a few hours, Mike forgot about the bill in his jacket pocket. Mark arrived last. Mike had known him for 3 years. He brought in a Mercedes E-Class, always paid without haggling, never argued over an invoice, and sometimes left a tip for the guys for no reason at all. Mid-40s, calm, didn't talk much. He worked in some consulting firm. Mike didn't know the specifics and never asked. Wasn't his business. His business was the car. Mark grabbed a drink, said hi to Steve, then found Mike near the back table and stood next to him. They talked about the car. Mark was thinking about swapping to winter tires and asked when he should book it. Then they just stood in silence for a bit. Eventually, Mark asked how things were going, and Mike, without planning to, blurted out, "Good, mostly. Except insurance just hit me again. $2,400. I'm so sick of it." Mark looked at him. Not with surprise, but with a mild interest. The way you look at a math problem that seems too easy. He asked, "Are you paying that as an individual?" Mike didn't entirely get the question. He said, "Well, yeah, it's in my name. Standard policy." Mark paused. Then he said his comprehensive coverage on 2 vehicles combined cost him less than $1,600 a year. Mike thought he misheard him. He asked him to repeat it. Mark repeated it calmly. Less than $1,600. For both. Mike set his drink down. It was that exact moment when a number hits your brain, but your processor doesn't know how to render it yet. He didn't say anything smart. He just asked, "How?" Mark didn't give a lecture. He kept it brief. "The vehicles are registered to my LLC. They're insured under a commercial auto policy through a broker. It's a completely different contract, a different rate tier, a different formula entirely. Insurers treat corporate entities differently. It's bulk pricing, retention metrics, different risk coefficients. Plus, a chunk of those costs are written off as business expenses. It's not a shady loophole, it's just paying out of a different pocket. Mike stared at him, trying to understand why he had never heard this before. Not just from a stranger, from anyone. Not in a single conversation, not in a single article he'd stumbled across online. It was like this knowledge existed on a completely different frequency that he just couldn't tune into. He asked, "Wait, so your cars are technically company cars? Do you drive them for work?" Mark smiled slightly. "They are work vehicles. I drive them to meetings, to client sites, to negotiations. It's business transportation. I track my mileage. The paper trail is bulletproof." Mike thought about his Camry. He drove it to the shop every day. He drove it to the parts distributor. He drove it to meet with suppliers. Technically, it was business transportation too. He just never thought about it in those terms. Then Mark said one more thing, and it hit the hardest. He said, "Do you know how much you're overpaying across the board, not just on insurance?" Mike didn't answer. He just waited. Mark spoke quietly, without an ounce of superiority. Just a guy explaining how the gears mesh. An individual consumer in America pays about 30 to 40% more for the exact same services than a business entity does. That's not an exaggeration, it's pure math. An LLC pays insurance at a commercial rate. An LLC deducts its operating expenses, lowering its taxable income, which immediately saves you another 20 to 30%. An LLC runs its costs through the business before taxes, whereas you, as an individual, are paying for everything out of your already taxed income. Mike picked his drink back up, took a sip, tried to swallow it all. He asked, "So wealthy families? They all operate like this?" Mark shrugged. "Not all of them, but the ones who understand the system do. It's not a secret. It's just knowledge they don't teach in high school because it's not profitable to explain it to the masses. Insurance companies aren't going to advertise commercial rates to individuals. Why would they willingly kill their margins? Banks aren't going to explain the difference between your base rate and your APR with origination fees baked in until you explicitly ask. Software vendors won't tell you their B2B enterprise tier is cheaper per license. The system doesn't hide this information. It just leaves it off the brochure." Mike stood there in silence. The shop was loud. Someone was laughing. Steve was telling a story by the toolboxes. Music was playing. But Mike was stuck on one thought. His whole life, he had been able to look at a machine and see exactly where it was losing horsepower, where the leak was, where the system was spinning its wheels, burning resources without generating output. It was his professional vision. And now, he was slowly realizing that the exact same leak was happening in his own finances. Year after year, methodically, invisibly. Not because he was being scammed, but because he had never looked at it as closely as he looked under a hood. Over $12,000 in pure overpayment on auto insurance alone over 7 years. And how much more on other things he never even tracked. When they signed the commercial lease for the shop, he paid his attorney out of pocket. The legal dispute with a supplier last year, out of pocket. He and Steve had a business bank account. They had their LLC set up. But his transport, his insurance, half of his professional services, all of it bypassed the business. It was coming out of his personal pocket. Out of money the IRS had already taxed. Mark finished his drink and mentioned that if Mike was interested, he knew a guy, a CPA, reasonably priced, incredibly practical, zero fluff. Worked specifically with small businesses. Could show him the leaks in one conversation, using actual numbers, not just theory. "Give me the number," Mike said. Mark pulled out his phone, found the contact, and held it up. Mike snapped a picture. They hung out for a few more minutes, talking about winter tires and how the incoming freeze was going to be brutal. Everything felt normal, but something had shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was exactly like that moment when you finally identify the source of an engine knock you've been hearing for months. The sound is exactly the same. But now, you know exactly where it's coming from. The diagnosis. Dave worked out of a small office on the second floor of an unassuming brick building about 15 minutes from the shop. No big signs, just a suite number. Inside were 2 desks, a wall of filing cabinets, a printer, and a window overlooking a parking lot. No fluff. Mike respected that. He worked in a bay that smelled like oil, and he trusted people without flashy storefronts more than people with them. Dave was in his 50s, average height, wearing a quarter-zip sweater. He spoke slowly and had a habit of looking at you like he was making sure you were keeping up with his train of thought. Not condescendingly, just carefully. Mike laid out his situation in 5 minutes. Co-owns an LLC, keeps his car in his personal name, pays insurance and out-of-pocket expenses from his personal account, and has been doing it for 7 years. Dave listened. He grabbed a piece of paper and a pen. Not a laptop, paper and pen. Let's diagram how you're paying right now, Dave said, and then I'll show you how you should be doing it. He drew 2 circles. In one he wrote, individual/W2. In the other, LLC, business entity. You make money through the shop, Dave said. You take an owner's draw or a salary. You pay your income taxes on it, state and federal. Then you take whatever is left over and you pay for your car insurance, your lawyer, your subscriptions as a private citizen. Meaning you gave the government their 20 or 30% cut first, and you're buying everything with the scraps, right? Yeah, pretty much, Mike said. Dave nodded. Now look at the other model. Those exact same expenses, commercial auto insurance for a vehicle used for business, legal retainers, software, tools, they are run as business expenses through the LLC. Provided you log your business mileage, of course. These expenses hit before taxes. You don't pay income tax on that money because it reduces your taxable net income on your Schedule C. That is your first layer of savings. Mike looked at the 2 circles. It reminded him of the difference between buying a part at a massive markup from a retail auto parts store versus buying it wholesale directly from the distributor. Exact same part. Completely different price, just because you're standing at a different point in the supply chain. Dave kept going. Now let's talk insurance. You buy a policy as an individual. The insurance company slots you into their retail matrix. 1 contract, 1 car, standard retail algorithms. A commercial auto policy works differently. They have a different rate sheet. Brokers pool small businesses together to access corporate discounts. The rate difference can be anywhere from 20 to 40% depending on the carrier. Wait, Mike interrupted. Same insurance company, same coverage limits, but cheaper, just because an LLC is writing the check? Exactly, Dave said. It sounds crazy, but yes. You're not calling the 1-800 retail number. You're calling a commercial broker. It's a different rep, a different pricing model, a different conversation. Dave wrote some numbers on the paper. He used the $2,400 bill Mike had brought with him as the baseline. He showed how a commercial policy through a broker would average around $1,600 for the same parameters. Then he showed how running that $1,600 as a deductible expense wiped it from Mike's taxable income. Assuming a conservative 22% tax bracket, that saved him roughly another $350 in taxes he wouldn't have to pay. The actual real-world cost of that insurance under the correct structure? Closer to $1,250 a year, compared to $2,400. Mike stared at the paper. He didn't say anything, just stared. Dave gave him a second. And that's just the auto policy, Dave added. Professional services work the same way. You pay retail for an attorney as a guy off the street. An LLC signs a corporate retainer, flat fee, billed as a B2B invoice, 100% tax deductible. Software subscriptions? Many have enterprise tiers that cost less per seat. It's not true for everything, but where the gap exists, it's massive. Mike finally looked up. Why did no one tell Steve and me this when we registered the LLC? Dave looked at him, paused, then spoke evenly. Because nobody is required to. The state registers your LLC and takes the filing fee. The bank opens your account and charges you merchant fees. The insurance company sells you a policy. Everyone just does their specific job. Structural financial optimization? That's a highly specific service that you have to actively seek out. It doesn't come in the welcome packet. It didn't sound like an accusation, and it didn't sound like an excuse. It was just a mechanical description of how the machine operated. Mike accepted it as exactly that. Then they mapped out the next steps. Dave explained the game plan. First, audit the LLC's books to ensure they were maximizing Schedule C deductions. Second, call a commercial broker, explain the car is used for business transport, and get a quote. Third, gather every single recurring expense that had a legitimate business purpose and migrate it to the business credit card, backed by proper receipts and a mileage tracking app. Mike wrote it all down. Not in his phone. He asked Dave for a piece of paper and wrote it by hand, the exact same way he'd write out a complex engine rebuild sequence. He didn't want to forget the order of operations. Dave charged him $250 for the consultation. Mike paid cash on the spot. It was a fraction of what he had overpaid on his car insurance in a single year. 3 weeks later, Mike called a commercial broker. The call took 20 minutes. The rep, a no-nonsense woman who moved fast, took his LLC info, verified the usage, and asked him to email his registration and EIN. 2 days later, the quote hit his inbox. $1,600. Same exact coverage limits, same deductibles, same car. Mike stared at the number on the screen. The difference from the previous bill was $800. For 1 year. On one single line item. He signed the DocuSign and paid the premium from his business checking account. Then he opened the Excel spreadsheet he had started keeping after his meeting with Dave. Auto insurance, minus $800. Legal services, replaced random $300 hourly bills with a $99 per month LegalZoom business advisory plan, fully deductible. Professional software, moved to the LLC. Fuel, opened a corporate fuel card, started running a mileage log app on his phone, legally capturing his work travel. By the end of the first quarter, he had shifted over $3,500 of expenses out of his personal checking and into the business. Based on his tax bracket, that maneuver alone dropped his tax burden by over $700, plus the raw savings on the commercial insurance rates. The first step was taken. No fireworks, no revolution, just operating differently. The symptom Eric lived in the next subdivision over. He and Mike had known each other for about 8 years. Not best friends, but they'd share a beer at neighborhood barbecues, and sometimes Eric would ask him to take a quick look at a weird noise in his car. Mike would diagnose it for free, and Eric would drop off a nice bottle of bourbon as a thank you. Good neighbor stuff. Eric was a construction foreman. He made about the same amount of money as Mike, and he always gave off the vibe of a guy who had everything totally under control. Spoke confidently, stood straight, never complained. One evening in November, Eric knocked on Mike's door. Mike had just gotten home from the shop and hadn't even changed his boots yet. Eric said he needed some advice. They sat at the kitchen island, and Mike grabbed them a couple of beers. Eric laid it out. His house desperately needed renovations. He'd put it off for 3 years, but now the master bathroom was leaking into the ceiling below. The wiring in the kitchen was sketchy, and he couldn't wait anymore. He got quotes. It was going to take about $15,000 to fix it right. He didn't have the cash on hand. He decided to take out a personal loan. Mike cracked his beer. What kind of rates are you looking at? Eric pulled out his phone and opened his banking app. He showed Mike the pre-approval. $15,000 personal loan, 25.9% interest rate, 36-month term. Monthly payment, $590. Mike looked at the screen. He wasn't a financial advisor, but after his meetings with Dave, he had started looking at numbers completely differently, not as facts to accept, but as symptoms to diagnose. Did they show you the APR? Mike asked. Eric looked a little confused. What do you mean? It's right there, 25.9. No, Mike said. Look at the disclosure document for the annual percentage rate. It's not the same as the base interest rate. The APR bakes in origination fees and any credit protection insurance they slide in. The real number is always higher. Eric scrolled down through the fine print on his screen, found the line. He read it out loud. 35.7% APR. Silence. Mike grabbed a notepad. He kept one on the counter now, a habit from Dave, and did the math out loud. 15 grand. 3 years. 35. 7% effective rate. The $590 monthly payment is right, but your total payout over 3 years? That's roughly $21,240. Your total overpayment in pure interest and fees is over $6,200. You're paying 21 grand for a 15 grand renovation. Eric stared at the numbers. His expression didn't change. He didn't turn pale or freak out. He just stared. Then he said, "Well, what else am I supposed to do? I need the money right now." Mike didn't reply immediately. He was thinking, not about what to say, but wondering if Eric actually heard the words that just came out of his own mouth. I need the money right now. That wasn't a financial strategy. That was surrendering to the moment. Mike had lived that exact same way for years. Bill comes, pay it. Need cash, borrow it. Never stopping to look at the mechanics of the machine you just turned on. He didn't say any of that out loud. He just asked, "Did you opt into the credit protection insurance on this thing?" Eric looked at his phone again. "It says optional, but the loan officer told me my approval odds and the rate would be better if I kept it." Mike nodded. Classic playbook. He had read about this while going down a rabbit hole after talking to Dave. Credit insurance on personal loans is legally optional, but bank reps frequently frame it as a necessary evil for a good rate. Technically, they aren't lying. The base rate might be slightly lower, but the cost of the insurance itself often outweighs the interest you save. You have to run the math on both scenarios. Run it separately, Mike told him. Look at the contract and see exactly what that insurance is costing you over 36 months. Then see what the base rate jumps to without it. 9 times out of 10, taking the slightly higher rate and dropping the junk insurance saves you hundreds. Eric typed it into his notes app, nodded. Then he looked up and asked, "How the hell do you know all this? You're a mechanic." Mike smirked. "We use the exact same tools. I just used to only point mine at cars." Eric left around 10. Mike cleared the bottles, sat at the island, and opened his spreadsheet. He did this every 2 weeks now, sat down and stared at the numbers, not because it was fun, but because he finally understood a fundamental truth. Whatever you don't measure, you can't control. That wasn't a finance guru quote. It was pure mechanics. Any system left unmonitored will degrade or drift off spec completely unnoticed. He looked at his totals for the quarter. Insurance saved $800, locked in. LLC expenses routed $3,500 through the business, cutting his tax bill by over $700. Legal $99 a month instead of random $300 hourly panic calls. Corporate fuel, tracked automatically, shaving another chunk off his taxable base. Total real dollar difference over 3 months, nearly $1,500. Money that previously just vanished. Not because someone stole it, but because he was pulling it out of the wrong pocket. He thought about Eric, about the $6,200 in loan overpayment. He knew Eric was probably going to sign the paperwork anyway. I need the money now. The logic made sense to a guy with his back to the wall. And over the next 3 years, Eric would pay back $21,200 and genuinely believe he did the smart thing, because the roof was fixed and the loan was paid off. He wouldn't feel the overpayment. It would be smeared over 36 monthly payments until it was invisible. Mike wasn't judging him. He had lived exactly like that. 7 years paying out $15,400 for a retail insurance policy and never looking at the bottom line. Because every individual $2,400 payment felt completely normal. $2,400 once a year is a line item. $15,400 over 7 years is a disaster. But connecting those two dots required sitting down and actually doing the math. No one was going to show up at his door with the grand total. He had to look for himself. He closed the laptop, stood up and walked to the window. The streetlights illuminated the driveway, showing his Camry, and further down the street, Eric's Honda Civic. It was a great car, well maintained. Eric took care of it. But Mike remembered the conversation 3 years ago when Eric financed it. He had said the exact same thing. I need it now. Mike had no idea how much Eric overpaid on that loan. He hadn't asked, none of his business. But he knew how to calculate it now. Mike walked back to the kitchen island, opened his spreadsheet one more time. He added a new row at the bottom, 12-month projection. If he stayed on track, the gap between his old system and his new system would be over $6,000 a year. Money not earned by working harder, just money that stopped leaking out of the system. That was the exact cost of a professional 2-post lift, or 3 months of rent for the shop, or the emergency fund he had dreamed about for 3 years, but could never seem to start. He typed the number into the cell. Just a fact. No exclamation points. The fix February arrived with brutal cold and that sharp, metallic white light you only get deep in the winter, when the sun reflects off the snow and makes your eyes water. Mike unlocked the shop at 8 a.m., right on schedule. Hit the lights, fired up the space heater, and put the coffee maker on the toolbox. His first appointment was at 9 o'clock, a routine service for a regular, nothing crazy. He unzipped his jacket and hung it on a hook, pulled an envelope out of his inside pocket. It had arrived in the mail yesterday, but he explicitly chose not to open it at home. It was a new rule he had made for himself. Never read financial documents on the fly, or in passing, or standing in the hallway. Sit down. Look at them closely. Treat them the way you treat an engine when you're hunting for a misfire. He sat down on the stool at his workbench and ripped the envelope open. It was from the insurance company. Not a retail renewal invoice. It was the upcoming term declaration for his commercial policy. His car, registered as a business transport vehicle for the LLC. The premium for the year, $1,600. He set the paper on the bench, pulled out his phone, opened the calculator, just like he had back in October, sitting under the exact same lamp. But the numbers he was punching in were very different now. $1,600 for the new policy, against the $2,400 from the year before. Difference? $800 in cold, hard cash on a single line item. He toggled over to his tracking sheet. In the 4.5 months since he audited his expenses and changed his payment structures, his total retained capital was almost $2,500. Real money that hadn't evaporated. Not won in a lottery, not earned by grinding extra weekends. Just kept, simply because he started paying out of the correct pocket and looking at the things he had ignored. He locked his phone, looked at the commercial declaration page one more time. Same insurance carrier, same car, different number. And there was absolutely no magic behind that new number, just the awareness that a commercial department existed with a different rep and a different rate sheet, and that all he had to do was call them instead of the 1-800 retail hotline. He remembered October, standing in the dark, looking at the stranger's car in his bay. Driving home, realizing he knew how to calculate everything in the world except his own money. The memory didn't make him angry anymore. It was just a data point, a baseline. The coffee maker beeped. Mike stood up, poured a mug, and walked back to the bench. Outside, he heard the crunch of tires on ice. His first customer was early. He took a sip of coffee, walked over, and hit the button for the bay doors. A dark blue Volkswagen Jetta pulled in. The driver was a guy in his mid-40s, wearing a topcoat and carrying a laptop bag, clearly grabbing service on his way into the office. He got out and nodded. "Just the oil and filters today, Mike." Mike nodded, grabbed the keys, and pulled the Jetta onto the lift. As he worked, dropping the skid plate, cracking the drain plug, watching the dark oil arc into the catch pan, he wasn't thinking about money. He was thinking about what had changed inside him over the last few months. On the outside, nothing was different. Same shop, same grind, same oil-stained hands. What changed was the way he looked at things. He had always been a diagnostician. That was his gift. Not just fixing a thing, but finding the root cause. Anyone with a wrench and a YouTube video can swap a part. But finding out why the system broke in the first place? That requires understanding the mechanics beneath the surface. For 7 years, he had been looking at his finances like a guy who only knows how to swap parts. He saw individual bills, individual accounts, individual payments. He never saw the whole engine, how the rules were engineered to benefit the house, not him. Insurance companies run on volume and segmentation. The individual citizen is the retail segment, maximum margin. An LLC is the corporate segment, completely different economics. Banks make their billions on the spread between the shiny interest rate on the billboard and the APR buried in the fine print. Service platforms push monthly subscriptions because an individual buyer is unpredictable, but an automated retainer is guaranteed cash flow. None of it is a scam, it's just business. The rules are out in the open. They just aren't written for the people who don't know where to look. Mike spun on the new oil filter, filled the crankcase, started the engine, and listened. Smooth. Perfect. The customer was standing by the door, scrolling on his phone. Mike lowered the lift and wiped his hands. He walked over. "You're all set. Oil is fresh. Filters are swapped. See you in 5,000 miles. The customer nodded. "Hey, can I put this on a corporate card? I run an LLC. Want to get the write-off?" Mike smiled. "Absolutely. I'll text you the business invoice." The Jetta pulled out. Mike closed the bay doors, walked back to the workbench. He picked up the commercial insurance declaration that had been sitting there since the morning. $1,600. He thought about that first conversation with Mark back in October. It took maybe 10 minutes. 10 random minutes sandwiched between a conversation about snow tires and the weather. One fact, one number, one question. Are you paying that as an individual? Behind that one question was an entire mechanism that had always been there, always functioning, always available to him. He just never walked through that door because he didn't know the door existed. Wealthy families don't pay retail for insurance, legal fees, or professional services because they have some VIP cheat code. They do it because they learned a long time ago that the economy operates on 2 floors, and they made sure to take the elevator to the second one. An individual citizen is the first floor. Retail pricing, maximum tax burden, zero leverage. A properly structured LLC is the second floor. Commercial rates, massive tax deductions, completely different rules. Stepping from the first floor to the second doesn't require millions of dollars. It just requires knowing how the elevator works and pressing the button. Mike tossed his coffee mug in the sink, pulled out his phone, opened the spreadsheet one last time, and looked at the bottom row. $6,000 retained annually. He locked the phone and slid it into his pocket. Outside, another engine pulled up to the shop. The day was starting. If this story hit home for you, drop one word in the comments below. Write-off. That tells me you watched till the end, and you finally understand which pocket you need to be paying out of. Hit subscribe. On this channel, we break down the exact mechanics of how pricing and taxes are engineered around the average guy, and give you the exact steps to get off the first floor and onto the second. Not in 10 years. Right now.